alcohol, cannabis, smoking, and nitrous oxide. All participants joining the webinar today are in listen and view only mode. After the presentation, there will be a question and answer session, and you can submit a question at any time during the webinar. To do so, please type your question into the Q&A box located at the bottom center of your Zoom screen. You may need to move your cursor or tap your touchscreen device to see it. This webinar is being recorded today and will be available for viewing on the NIDA website in coming days. I'm Sun, the Project Support Officer at NIDA, and I'll be facilitating today's presentation. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land where I'm situated today, the Wadawurrung clan of the Darug Nation, whose cultures and customs have nurtured and continue to nurture this land since the Dreamtime. We pay our respect to elders past, present, and future. For those of you who are new to this webinar series, the series is presented by Annie Bleeker. Annie has worked with HIV, AIDS, and alcohol and other drug sector for the past 30 years. She's lived and worked in the Netherlands for 5 years, implementing peer education programs for people who use drugs. She's also spent 2 years working in Indonesia, training community workers on how to respond to alcohol and drug issues and prevent transmission of HIV. She has taught at several universities in Sydney and is currently working as a senior training specialist for AOD, NIDA's sister agency in the ACT. So without further ado, I'll hand you over to Annie.
Thank you. Thanks so much for that. Good morning. Good afternoon, everybody. As Sun said, my name's Annie Bleeker, and I'm going to take you through the second webinar series today. We're going to an update on alcohol, smoking, vaping, cannabis, and nitrous oxide, which is commonly referred to as NANGs, and also provide you with some harm reduction information. Like Sun, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners on whose land I'm meeting today. I'm talking to you from up in the Northern Rivers on Bundjalung country. So I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of the land on which we meet and pay my respects to elders, families, and ancestors. And I'd particularly like to acknowledge everyone online who's from First Nations background and wherever you are. I'd also like to acknowledge the people that have got lived experience, either with mental health, drug and alcohol in this area. You've got a lot to contribute in the field. As I said, this is what we'll be covering in the seminar today. And I hope we've got some time at the end to answer any questions that you might have. And as Sun said, please put them in the chat box and we'll have a look at them at the end. So the first drug I want to talk to you about is alcohol. And as many of you know, alcohol is made when yeast ferments with the sugars and grains in fruits and vegetables. Alcohol is arguably the most marketed product in the world, and a 1999 study found that alcohol was in 98% of all movies and about 27% of all popular songs. So I challenge you to have a look and see if there's a movie that doesn't have alcohol in it. And I think just this subtle sort of, I guess, sort of messaging around alcohol makes us sort of think this is okay. So again, if they don't get us through the movies, another place they can get us through is the sport. And for those of you who might be old enough online and remember that the cricket was sponsored by Benson and Hedges, and now we see that pretty well every sport is got alcohol advertising in it. What we know from alcohol advertising is exposure to it influences young people's beliefs and attitudes around alcohol and normalises it. And it also sees the likelihood that adolescents will start earlier. If they don't get you through the sport, then another place that they get you through is social media. And so there's a lot of subtle advertising on social media about kind of like checking into the Bundy tent when we used to be able to sort of like socialise. And again, they've found that exposure to to alcohol advertisements through social media has also been shown to increase drinking amongst young people. So let's look at some key points around alcohol. So approximately, it's arguably our favourite drink, a favourite drug in Australia. We have 3/4 of the Australian population over the age of 14, according to the latest household survey that reported that they drank alcohol in the preceding year. We have seen some good news around alcohol in that we are seeing young people particularly reduce their drinking. However, older Australians are continuing to drink at the level that they were in their 20s, and that's been quite hazardous. So the proportion of 14 to 17-year-olds who'd never had a drink had actually increased from 66% compared to 28% compared to 2001. So, you know, every now and then we get a healthier generation, and certainly generation of young people have proved to be a little bit healthier than their parents are. We are seeing overall some reductions in alcohol use. So 9% of the population reported that they abstain from alcohol. So this is going in the right direction. We used to be in the top 10 drinkers in the world. We're now up to about, we're in the top 20, about number 19. So the main alcohol that we like to purchase in Australia is beer and wine, which contributes to together about 39% of sort of pure alcohol sales, followed by spirits and ready to drink, which is about 20%. However, spirits and ready to drink alcohol is much more popular amongst young people. The average Australian household spends about $32 on alcohol per week. I think at the beginning of COVID last year, that increased quite significantly when all of the panic buying happened around that. It's also the most common drug that people seek treatment for in New South Wales, but also just in Australia generally. So what does alcohol do? It promotes a sense of relaxation, loss of alertness and coordination, slower reaction time, impaired memory and judgment. Can particularly happen when people have had, you know, 3, 4, 5 drinks, you know, nausea and shaking. And as we go further down the list, you can see the glug, glug, ugly sort of sides of what alcohol can do to you. What I want to do now is just show you a quick video that Sun's going to play you, which was produced by The Conversation. It's available on YouTube, and it's just a 2-minute video just to take you through alcohol. So Sun, if you could play that, that would be good. I've got no sound on my end.
We can approximate effects based on blood alcohol concentration, or BAC. At a BAC between 0.02 to 0.03, perhaps one standard drink, there are very few obvious effects, with only a slight intensification of mood. After 2 to 2.5 drinks, in the first hour, your BAC climbs to about 0.05 to 0.06, and you might experience a feeling of warmth, relaxation, mild sedation, and you're likely to start talking more and feel less inhibited. These effects all happen in the brain's frontal lobe, which is responsible for stopping us from doing and saying socially inappropriate things. When alcohol enters the frontal lobe, it impairs our ability to control our behaviour. At a BAC of 0.07 to 0.09, your speech will start to slur and you'll not be as balanced when you move. There'll also be a decrease in reaction time and coordination, hence the legal driving limit of 0.05 in Australia. Your hearing and vision will also be impaired. And it's pretty much just downhill from here. At a BAC of 0.13 to 0.15, you'll have significant loss of coordination and balance, blurred vision, and your judgment will be severely impaired. Most people will start to feel nauseous and may start vomiting if their BAC gets to close to 0.2. At a BAC of around 0.3, you'll be in a state of near unconsciousness, if not unconscious already. Coma is possible at 0.35 and up, and death is just around the corner.
Okay, so as I said, that's quite a good little sort of summary of alcohol and its effects. And you can see basically if you start to drink faster than 1 drink an hour, that's when people start to get intoxicated, because that's how long it takes the liver to process a standard drink. So some of the long-term effects. So those of you who attended the session might remember that about 1 in 7 or 8 people who try alcohol go on to become dependent on it. So that is a huge issue with alcohol. We are also seeing, because it's alcohol swallowed, that we're starting to see an increase in oral throat and breast cancers. And if people start to drink over what the what's recommended by the National Health and Medical Research Council, and we'll talk a little bit more about that now. So what they found in studies about the risk with breast cancer is that women had a 5% chance of getting breast cancer if they drank over the limit pre-menopause, and post-menopause that was up to 9%. And we have about 2,000 deaths a year associated with alcohol and cancer. So in 1988, the World Health Organization actually considered that alcohol was a group 1 carcinogen in exactly the same, in a similar sort of vein as smoking is. Also because the main organ that's used to process alcohol out of our body is liver. So we're starting to see liver cirrhosis happening, also brain damage and dementia, some forms of heart disease and stroke. So here's the information around alcohol and cancer. So this is from 2010. So the Cancer Council of Australia estimated that about 3,200 cases of cancer in Australia, or almost 3% of all cancers, were attributed to alcohol consumption. So there's very strong evidence that alcohol increases the risk of cancers of the mouth, pharynx, larynx, esophagus, stomach, bowel, liver, and breast. This is much more synergized or much more problematic if people drink and smoke. You've got a much more higher chance of getting that. So again, I think this is one thing the alcohol companies don't want us to know about, is the links between alcohol and cancer, and certainly the same way that we're seeing with the graphic advertisements on tobacco cigarettes. So just want to talk a little bit about the early parental supply of alcohol, because I'm sure there's some parents online. This is a study that was conducted in 2017 by colleagues of mine at the National Drug and Alcohol Research Centre. And what they did is enrolled 2,000 adolescents in a study between year 7 and year 12. And the answer that they were trying to look at is whether or not parental supply leads to more moderated drinking or to greater alcohol consumption. And there was this sense that if we can get people to adopt a more European style of drinking, which is drinking to moderation rather than drinking to get drunk, this might, see some reductions in alcohol use amongst young people. As you might remember from last week, about 43% of parents kids reported in the last study that was done of secondary school students that 43% of parents had supplied alcohol to their teenagers. I guess one of the premises of this is that a lot of parents think that if they introduce alcohol in a safe environment, it might mean that their kids are less likely to drink. It might promote more moderate drinking behaviours and model this more European style of drinking. However, I guess my sort of hypothesis is if you give someone something, it sort of sends out a message to them that's okay. So basically, as you can see there, the figures of how much alcohol has been supplied by parents. The unique thing of this study is that they looked at whether or not people had given their kids sips of alcohol or full serves of alcohol, and they measured this over a range of harms. And this is what they basically found is that if you gave your kids sips of alcohol, they were 1.3 times more likely to be a binge drinker, and they were 8 times more likely to experience alcohol-related harms. It wasn't, sipping wasn't significant with dependence or with alcohol use disorder. However, you can see on the bottom line here, about 4 serves of alcohol was almost 2.7 times more likely to become a binge drinker, 2.7 times more likely to experience alcohol-related harms, twice as likely to develop dependence, and 2.3 times more likely to develop an alcohol use disorder. So I guess the moral of the story is don't provide young people with alcohol. What they found is that when parents provided alcohol to their young people, they were also more likely to get that from kids as well. So this can be a little bit of a difficult message to swallow. Sorry, didn't mean that, but it's really important to that we don't provide our kids with alcohol. So in Australia, a standard drink is considered to be 10 grams of alcohol, and you can see here what that means. And I guess if we look at beer, contains up to about 6 to 7% alcohol content, which is why you can drink more of it. compared to spirits, which contains between 30 to 50% alcohol content. And again, you can see that a 2-litre cask of wine or a 4-litre cask of wine, which is a popular drink for young people, has, and this is a 2-litre one, it's about sort of 20 standard drinks. So it would be really good if we started to basically introduce pricing on alcohol here in Australia to increase the price of goon, or goon as it's often known with young people. We don't have a standard measurement for alcohol around the world, and you can see here that, and that's why the messages on alcohol have been kind of quite confusing. So Australia follows the World Health Organization definition, which is 10 grams of alcohol. UK has the lowest amount, so that's 8 grams is considered to be a standard drink. But if you go to Portugal or the US or Canada, you can see that it's almost 1.5 times what it is in Australia. Okay, I'm just going to do a quick and basically late last year, the National Health and Medical Research Council released some new guidelines on the health risks associated with alcohol. And this poll basically is asking, according to the NH and MRC guidelines, how many standard drinks can an adult over the age of 18 drink per week to reduce the harms of drinking? So if you've got that poll on your screen, if you can answer that, is it 8? Is it 10? Is it 12? Is it 14? Is it 16? And I'll leave the poll open for another 10 seconds so that you can answer that. Okay, 2 more seconds. Okay, end polling. All right, share the results. So the correct answer is actually 10 standard drinks. So most of you chose 8 standard drinks, maybe when they were, so they revise these guidelines every 10 years. So I suspect it will probably go down to 8 standard drinks, or we may well even sort of say there is no safe level of consumption. And I guess what happens is a whole lot of experts review the evidence on alcohol. And when we started to sort of see the cancer links come up quite prevalently and some of the alcohol-related harms, this is when we started to see the reduction in drinking. People might remember the 2001 guidelines. For men, it was 24 standard drinks a week. And for women, it was half that amount. And the guidelines before were 14. But now it's been revised down to 10 standard drinks. So thanks for those who participated in that. If we look at it, so basically what the guidelines say is that to reduce the harm of, and this is for healthy adults over the age of 18, so to reduce the risk of alcohol-related harm, adults should not drink more than 10 standard drinks per week and no more than 4 standard drinks on any day. So 5 standard drinks is considered to be binge drinking. And obviously the less you choose to drink over a lifetime, the lower your risk of alcohol-related harm. If we're looking at the evidence around alcohol-related harm and when you will reduce your risk of sort of developing cancers, it's similar to tobacco. So after 5 to 10 years of not drinking, you will go down to the same risk as a non-drinker. If we look at the information around children and young people under 18, they basically recommend that we don't provide alcohol at all. For those of you who are on the who participated in the webinar last week, I mentioned that New Zealand had basically reduced its up until 1999. It was 20 was the legal limit for drinking. They revised it down to 18, and they were I think severely regretting that they had done that. Basically what they found when they lowered the age, that it was associated with more frequent drinking at pubs and nightclubs amongst the new age group of 18 to 19. They also saw that they drank more at other people's places and greater quantities were kind of consumed. And it basically meant that there was more harmful drinking. So one of the ways that we could actually reduce alcohol-related harm would be to raise our drinking age, but that is a very unpopular policy option, and there's no way the public would buy that, unfortunately, but certainly that's where the evidence lies. So some of you might have already had to attend to someone who maybe a child of yours had or when you were young, you might have had to get someone to hospital because they'd drunk too much alcohol. And basically, as you saw in that little film that we showed you, basically you can die if your blood alcohol concentration gets above 0.3. For young people, it can, because they've got a faster metabolism, that can already happen at 0.25. So if someone were to scull half a bottle of vodka with their friends, which contains about 22 standard drinks in an hour, that is could be a lethal amount. So if anyone has ever seen these signs, it's really important that the person gets to hospital and maybe gets their stomach pumped. We get one young person dying each week of alcohol, excuse me, alcohol-related causes. So just whole facts around this. So basically drinking at a younger age, when people initiate into alcohol, and that's any drug use for that matter of fact, at a younger age, they tend to increase their alcohol or other drug use as they get older. We see the highest amounts of people accessing accident and emergency amongst teenagers. They're 2 times more likely than adults to go to ED related to alcohol. You can see that, you know, over 1 in 10 deaths in 14 to 17-year-olds are attributed to alcohol, which I think is pretty kind of a scary statistic. As I said before, it takes the liver approximately 1 hour to detoxify a standard drink, longer for women. And also some people of Asian descent, also because they don't have one enzyme in their body, they're also more likely to take longer to process alcohol. So sobering up takes time. So even though, you know, a lot of people go to sleep and think after a couple of hours that they're no longer under the influence, if you've had a big session like 10, 12, 15 standard drinks, it can be until after lunchtime the next day that you're actually kind of sober. So the lethal dose of alcohol can be anywhere between 0.3 to 0.45, and that just means about 30% of your blood or 40% of your blood contains alcohol, which is, you know, a lethal dose. Women are more susceptible to the harms, as I said before, so we have less dehydrogenase in our body, so we'll get drunk faster and we'll have alcohol in our system longer. So in the Netherlands, they actually advise women to wait for 90 minutes rather than 60 minutes to detoxify alcohol. As I said before, younger people reach a higher blood alcohol faster than older people because they've got faster metabolism, and early and frequent drinking leads to problems later in life, i.e. you're more likely to become dependent, more likely to get liver cirrhosis and pancreatitis and cancer, etc. And I guess the really startling statistic, as I mentioned last week before, it takes on average 18 years before someone who will access treatment for their alcohol use once the problem has developed, which is a significant amount of damage that they're doing to themselves as well as their families. And a lot of this is driven by the stigma associated with having an alcohol dependence or problem. And please remember this stat and also communicate it to your clients if alcohol is their problem drug. So I've just got some harm reduction here around alcohol. So try to limit your alcohol to 10 standard drinks per week. What tends to happen in Australia is we don't drink daily. We tend to save those for a Friday or a Saturday night binge. As I talked about last week, we have a real kind of culture of binge drinking here that was very much implemented when pubs were closing at 6 o'clock. So that was known as the 6 o'clock swill. And so people would drink as much alcohol before the pubs closed after work. Important not to drink daily because, you know, this increases your risk of dependence. Whether or not you've had a bad or a good day, you tend to reach for alcohol. Even though it's not in the guidelines, most of the experts suggest that you have at least 2 alcohol-free days a week to break that cycle of dependence, but also to give your liver and your brain a break from it. Obviously, if you're pregnant or trying to fall pregnant or breastfeeding, the safest option is not to drink. And I also think, you know, even though there's a lot of kind of emphasis on women around this one, you can be really supportive of your partner to not drink and help them as well during if they're pregnant, because we are seeing sort of like alcohol is also affecting kind of like men and their sperm count as well. So again, you know, the thing about we're taking 1 hour to process out of your body. Try to have non-alcoholic drinks. Try to avoid rounds. You know, we've got rid of happy hours in most places, except for when you travel, when we can do that again. It's really good to have food in your stomach, because this will slow the absorption of alcohol, so you're less likely to get as drunk, and the food will absorb some of the alcohol content. We are seeing, you know, and now we've got bars in Melbourne that are open that don't serve alcohol at all. We are seeing that you've got 0 alcohol beer and also 0 alcohol wine type drinks. Make sure that you, you know, when you start drinking, working out, and I think this is a big issue for young people, how to get home. And I guess, you know, beer goggles can be a good thing. So this is a good message for young people. Beer goggles is not a good thing, but this often happens with alcohol, is that, you know, people can suddenly hook up with people that they wouldn't normally do. And this is just because of what alcohol can do to us. I think a really good message around alcohol and COVID, and we saw this a lot with alcohol increasing, drinking, particularly at the beginning of COVID last year, is a lot of people who have anxiety will use alcohol to kind of quell their anxiety. So just be aware of trying to drink less in those type of times. I think it's also, if you've ever been to a pub or club, you'll just know how difficult it is to avoid, you know, social distancing, particularly as people start to drink more. So it's really important to, not that you can go there for those of you who are living in Sydney, but, you know, we can still, you know, this is a good message to pay attention to. Okay, any questions about alcohol, please put them in the poll there. So now I'm going to just take you quickly through nicotine and alcohol and vaping, and I know there were some questions about this one last week. So we're just going to do a quick poll on smoking, and basically this is, so we're going to look at poll number 2. I'll just launch that. So there was a study that was conducted in 2015 by the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare, found that smoking was causally related to how many different diseases? 13, 27, 35, 39, or 43. I'll leave that open for another 10 seconds for those of you who can vote. Okay, I'll close it off now. Thank you for those who participated. Okay, so the vast majority of you picked 27. The actual correct answer, which was by 9 people, is actually 39. So thank you for participating in that. And we'll just take you through that. So you can see here, so 39 individual diseases, including 9 types of cancer, 7 types of cardiovascular disease, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, as well as asthma. So it's probably, it is the most poisonous substance, followed by alcohol for us to do. We just look at kind of like the burden of cancer. The tobacco is the leading cause of cancer in Australia, so it's about 22% of all cancer burden. There are about 7,000 chemicals in tobacco smoke, and at least 250 of them are known to be harmful. And of those 250, 69 of those are reported to cause cancer. You can see here how much it costs the Australian government each year. So it's $31.5 billion in social, health and economic costs per year, which is about $12,000 per smoker in Australia. The harms and benefits of e-cigarettes are strongly debated, and I'll take you through vaping after we just go through tobacco. What I just wanted to share here, and I just want to talk a little bit about the cost of smoking in Australia. So Australia has the most expensive place to live if you are a smoker. As I said in last week's presentation, we've done a really, really good job of getting rich white people to stop smoking in Australia. We find high levels of smoking in the higher disadvantaged groups. Now, this was a photo that was taken by a grandma in Tasmania in 2018. And this was basically how much food you could buy for a packet of cigarettes. Now, cigarettes have gone up about they go up 12.5% every year. This was an exercise that the Australian government set in 16, sorry. And so basically the price of cigarettes increases by 12.5%. So a packet of tailor-made cigarettes ranges anywhere, but depending on brand, between about sort of $35 to almost $50. If you roll your own cigarettes, depending on whether you buy a 30 gram or 50 gram packet, 50 gram packet by the time you buy filters and papers is around $90 to $95. So it's quite an expensive habit. And if you think about the fact that it's mainly low income people that are smoking, one of the things, and if you're smoking a packet a day, you can see that there's not much money left over for food and rent and all of those type of things. One of the things that I would like to see us do in Australia is maybe do some studies on getting some of those poor people to quit. So we've got some really good incentivization programs that are happening over in the US and Switzerland and in Europe. And these studies have been done with pregnant women who smoke. And basically what they do is give them vouchers. They provide them with some counselling as well as NRT on top of that. And basically if they get, if they stay off smoking, they get vouchers. And they basically found, so they were paying, in the US, they paid, pregnant women about $1,000 in vouchers to quit. And they were found that they were up to 3 times more likely to quit. In the UK, that is a similar study with pregnant women, and they were found that they were 2 times likely to quit compared to those that weren't incentivised. And a Swiss program who paid up to $2,000 vouchers found that over the 6-month period, smokers were 1.6 times more likely to be smoke-free at 18 months compared to those that were not incentivised. So I'd really like to see some of that happening. Particularly if you look at the statistics here, as I said, so 4 in 10 First Nations people are current smokers, 1 in 5 are the poorest Australians, 1 in 5 who live in remote areas, 7 in 10 men and 6 in 10 women with mentally ill health, and 8 in 10 people who are on opiate substitution therapy. So, you know, a lot of these people are not as wealthy, obviously, as other people. So perhaps even if we introduced incentivisation, this would be a good thing. Not going to go through a lot of this in detail because many of you know about the short and the long-term effects of tobacco because it's been around in a while. So it's a stimulant drug. It increases the heart rate and the blood pressure. You know, some people, particularly if you think about the first time if people ever tried smoking, felt quite nauseous after the first cigarette, have a weakened sense of taste and smell, reduced appetite, again, because of the stimulant effects of it. And again, you know, the peak effects of nicotine delivery happen about 10 minutes after the cigarette's been smoked. Some of the long-term effects, which we talked about before, so this causes, as we said, a huge amount of burden on the health system in Australia. And again, you know, most of the money that we collect from smoking is in taxation. But if you think that it costs $31 billion a year in costs, certainly, you know, we're not getting enough money out of it for how much it costs the sort of society. I guess some of the things that we've sort of seen when, you know, with long-term effects of smoking is accelerating aging. And this was one way we thought that we would appeal to women around it. You know, this is one of the kind of like health warnings that we've seen on tobacco. So it's been 10 years since we introduced plain packaging in Australia, and that was introduced by the Rudd government when they were in power. Okay, I just want to spend a bit of time now on vaping because I know this is something that's really kind of increasing in Australia. So as I said last week, we've seen vaping double in the 14 to 17-year-old age group, and we've seen it triple in the 18 to 24-year-old age group. So e-cigarettes were originally developed in China. The name of them was called Ruyan, basically meaning almost like smoke. The guy who developed them, developed e-cigarettes, his father died of smoking-related causes. He was also a smoker himself. So basically what he was trying to do was find a safer way to administer nicotine in the body that wasn't going to do a lot of harm. So they were originally invented as a stop smoking or as a replacement for smoking. I guess the tricky thing is with the e-cigarettes is they've done so well with reducing tobacco smoking in Australia. So we have about 11% of people that are current smokers in Australia. We don't want to see that kind of increasing. So basically these early ones, as you can see here, were lithium battery operated, and they burned a liquid-based nicotine solution. They simulated cigarette smoking. They were promoted as a healthier alternative, I guess, to smoking. And as we can see on this page, you can see we're up to the 4th generation of vaping or e-cigarettes now. So the first ones looked very much like cigarettes. I remember being at a harm reduction conference, and they brought these ones out, and and I guess they weren't particularly kind of cool looking, and really what the manufacturers of this have done is real. And Philip Morris and all of the big tobacco companies weren't really very much interested in these cigarettes in the early stages, but as they started to develop further, and we saw sort of like around 2010, a massive amount of investment by Philip Morris tobacco into e-cigarettes, because they suddenly realised this was, if we made them look a little bit different and make them appeal to young people, that they would be more attractive, and they could certainly get more of their market. So the 2nd generation looked more like a pen. The 3rd generation of them are more like a mod. And the 4th generation of them are these ones here that look very much like a USB. So they and you can see how much more of appeal, particularly these 4th generation ones, are to young people. And again, they focused very much on kind of marketing of them. So and I'll go through the rules about what they are. So you're basically not allowed to purchase them under the age of 18. So the smoking legislation also applies to vaping. So they can contain different types of substances, so flavour, nicotine, and then there's also vaping that can be done with THC oils. And certainly many of the deaths that we saw associated with in the States were related to people inhaling THC, THC oil. There's no quality control in a lot of these cigarettes now. So these ones here are the more, kind of cool ones, I guess, on looking very much like a USB. They can be charged in a computer as well. So you just stick them in and you can basically get charged. So 90% of them are manufactured in China. Even though they're said to contain no nicotine, some of them actually do contain nicotine. So we don't know what a lot of chemicals and toxins in them. So if you think about the new generation ones that have only been around for 10 years, it took us a long time before we were actually able to look at, what the research really came out about the harms of tobacco. So it may well be 10 years before we really know what the sort of full amount of harm is associated with e-cigarettes. So they can contain nicotine even when they're labelled nicotine, and there's no way of knowing which device contains nicotine without laboratory kind of testing. Now, Juuls were, and these are probably the most popular e-cigarettes now. This is what they look like. You can see here the USB version of it. They were introduced into the US market in about 2015, and they're now the most popular e-cigarette in the US, but also here. So they have disposable pods of e-liquid in Virginia tobacco, classic tobacco, and then they've got all sorts of fruity menthol flavours. And they get 200 puffs or 20 cigarettes per pod. And they're up to about $35 to $45, including shipping if you buy them from the US. These, the Juul pods contain the highest content of nicotine, so 5% by weight. And they use a kind of Juul salts, which is based on nicotine salts. So the unique thing about Juuls compared to other e-cigarettes is that they actually deliver the same amount of nicotine basically as smoking. So remember we talked about the that about 10% you get the same kind of peak as with smoking. This is exactly what Juuls does. So these are the most efficient way of delivering nicotine. And as we know, and I think the important thing to note about smoking versus, smoking is that it's the nicotine that keeps people smoking, but it's the tar that actually kind of kills them. These are, and you can look at it here. I mean, is this actually aimed at adults? You can see very much. And these are the disposable devices. HQDs is one of the brands, or STIGs as they're known. They're compact, they're disposable, they're very colourful. They contain nicotine salt, huge range of flavours, and they're obviously very much marketed to a young group. If some of you have been in the field for a while, you might remember that we had the breezes or the cruisers and stuff, and you can see very much that they're using exactly the same marketing to get young people into their market. So the alcohol industry used brightly coloured sweet flavoured products to capture the youth market, and now we can see that the e-cigarette companies are doing exactly the same thing where we're when we're introducing nicotine to young people. So why do young people vape? Well, an Australian study found that young adult users between 18 to 25 favoured devices containing nicotine and followed by flavourings. The most popular flavours were apple and strawberry, followed by candy flavours and bubble gum. So again, these are not kind of flavours that your average adult smoker would prefer. The research basically highlighted that curiosity was one of the key reasons for using very wide range of sweet flavours. People said that they enjoyed them and that they were sort of seen as cool and trendy. But also there was this perception that they were a lot sort of safer than smoking. And manufacturers promote very much them as a way to bypass the smoking laws. People can do it because it's certainly easy to do. I guess, the big question, and there's a lot of kind of controversy around this, can they be used to stop people from smoking? Is it safe? Well, vaping may be safer than smoking, but it's not without risk. And the claim that e-cigarettes emit only harmless water vapour isn't true. Lower levels of many toxins than cigarette smoke, but lots still contain nicotine, ultrafine particles and other toxic chemicals and carcinogens. Non-vapers are exposed to exhaled or secondhand smoke, and e-cigarette aerosols have measurable levels of nicotine metabolites in their blood. I've got to say there isn't a lot of sort of strong evidence about this sort of secondhand smoke around e-cigarettes at the moment. We might have more evidence. We need a lot more research around this. But basically, in 2018, the US Surgeon General basically said that less harm doesn't equal harmless. And I think this is a really kind of, confusing message. So even though vaping has been banned on social media, you will still see a lot of social influencers using vaping on their Instagram. And surveys have revealed, and this was a thing that was released in The Conversation in late May, surveys have revealed that young people consider e-cigarettes to be a healthy and less addictive alternative to cigarettes with fewer harmful chemicals and secondhand smoke. Now, one of the important differences between e-cigarettes and smoking is that they don't deliver tar in the same way that cigarettes do. So in that sense, we could sort of say that they're sort of safer. So tobacco contains more chemicals and at higher levels than e-cigarettes, but we have found that there's some possible links with lung disease. In some studies, we know that vaping liquids contain components that can cause health effects, and vaping liquids can be contaminated with pesticides and fungus. But this is particularly related to THC. So many of the deaths that were happening in the US were related to contaminated THC, E. coli that was in the e-cigarettes. So some people use them to quit smoking, and I guess, and some clinical trials have shown that this is more effective than other quitting aids such as cigarette patches. I guess there's still debate in the literature about whether or not it's a gateway to smoking. And I guess one of the questions that, you know, some people ask is that if people are vaping, are they, or would they have, if vaping hadn't have been around, would they have likely to have tried smoking? So again, we don't really know. So as I said, if we look at the legislation around it, it's illegal to sell e-cigarettes, accessories to a person under the age of 18. It's illegal to display or advertise or promote them. We basically in January last year, we made it illegal to import nicotine into the country. So you can basically get nicotine prescribed to you, vaping nicotine prescribed to you by a doctor. But you're not allowed to purchase it anymore in New South Wales. But with the fact that we don't actually, even though things say that they don't have nicotine in them, without us testing every product, we don't actually know if that's the case. I just heard on the news actually this morning that up in the Central Coast, they closed down about 4 outlets that were selling e-cigarettes to young people under the age of 18. So from January 21, as I said before, the government will no longer allow the importation of nicotine-containing liquids for e-cigarettes, but you can get a prescription from your doctor for it. Smoking and harm reduction. This has been a really controversial area, whereas we have harm reduction for most drugs. You know, most, I guess, diehard people that have been in the field would sort of say every cigarette does you damage. So basically, we can't promote harm reduction. So there's no type of smoking that's been shown to reduce the risk of dying. We know that using a patch or a nicotine replacement like gum or inhaler or lozenges to cut down increases your chances of quitting by 50 to 60%. I also, as I said before, the amount of people that, you know, some of the studies that have paid people to quit smoking have found really good acceptance and commitment therapy that's often referred to, have found also that, you know, between 1.6 to 3 times more likely to quit. Smoking less potentially reduces your risk of developing lung cancer. Vaping potentially is less risky than smoking, but again, quitting is also better. And, you know, the moral of the story is quitting all tobacco products is the only harm reduction approach that we can say for sure reduces harm. If you're interested in getting more information about e-cigarettes, Professor Hayden McRobbie did a great webinar on vaping and e-cigarettes last 2 weeks ago for Positive Choices. This is about a half an hour sort of summary of the evidence, and I suggest that you have a look at it. It's available on the Positive Choices website. We will be providing people with a PDF copy of this presentation, so you can just click on the link and have a look at it there. If vaping is also a big issue for you and the clients that you're using, Paul Dillon, who runs Drug and Alcohol Research and Training Australia, is quite passionate about e-cigarettes and vaping, and particularly sort of, you know, seen an increase in young people. He's got some really good information on his website that's available there, and you can see there's some fact sheets, there's some resources. There's also, you know, some conversation starters for young people around e-cigarettes. I guess a lot of the things that you could kind of talk about with them is around young people a lot more environmentally conscious than we are. So the disposable e-cigarettes do a lot of devices do a lot of kind of damage to the environment. One of the things Paul also suggests is actually if you pull apart one of those disposable ones, you can see that some of them are held together with sticky tape. So then just having kind of conversations around that, maybe even about why do you think they've got bubblegum flavour, et cetera, et cetera. That's not really something that adults would be interested in. Just a little bit of a note around kind of COVID. I mean, we know that smoking increases the risk of lung infections, and smokers are twice as likely to get pneumonia and 5 times more likely to get the flu than non-smokers. and people with smoking damaged lungs and those with COPD are likely to have higher levels of ACE2 receptors, which is what the SARS coronavirus likes to grab onto. So they're a lot more vulnerable to dying of COVID. So I guess this is a really good incentive if you've got clients and COVID is around for the foreseeable future. There's some really good information about kind of quitting for COVID, and we've certainly seen people reducing their smoking over this time. I just wanted to make a comment about Shisha, which is also something that's become a lot more popular amongst young people. We're seeing more of these type of shops pop up everywhere, and again, marketed as fruity flavour. I think I just want to draw your attention to the last point on this slide, that having 45 minutes on the smoking on a shisha pipe is the equivalent of 100 cigarettes in lung damage. So again, don't be deceived and just think because this isn't tobacco that it isn't harmful. I think this is a pretty kind of outstanding statistic here to talk to. We find very much higher levels of shisha smoking in Middle Eastern type of communities. But again, this has also become popular amongst young people. Okay, just quickly talk about sort of cannabis. So this is often referred to as a depressant and or hallucinogenic drug. It's actually in its own separate group of drugs called the cannabinoids. It's mainly smoked in Australia. It can be vaporized, and this is certainly one of the better ways to use the drug. It can also be eaten, which is a lot less harmful for the airways. But the problem with eating cannabis is it's a bulbous dose. It's like 5 times stronger, but it takes a lot longer to come on. So it contains about 500 different compounds. About 100 of those are cannabinoids. And I guess if people are looking at the medical use of cannabis, they're looking at what these different cannabinoids are doing in it. So the primary ingredient that gets us stoned or high is called THC, or delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol. One other really important cannabinoid in the group is something called CBD. And CBD is actually an anti-anxiety property. And this is often what is taken out of the plant and used a lot in medicine. So this is particularly effective for particularly Dravet syndrome or childhood epilepsy. And what we find now with many of the plants grown in Australia is that they have very low amounts of cannabidiol in them. So when you increase the amount of THC in the plant, you reduce all of the other cannabinoids in it. So whereas it used to be in equal amounts about 20 years ago, 20 to 30 years ago, we now find that there's less than 1% of the plant is containing cannabidiol. So basically when people buy cannabis here in Australia, they want the dried flowers or the heads of the female cannabis plant. We don't really have any hash available in Australia. We used to have a lot of hash and hash oil or THC oil about 30 years ago, before the hydroponic industry became really popular. Now, mainly if hash is in this country, it's imported in here, or otherwise people are making themselves, but it's not really available on the market. Edible cannabis, we also don't have that available, not to say that people don't make their own cakes or cookies or butter, but certainly if you look at what's happening in America, you can get chocolate, you can get drinks, you can get gummy bears, etc. So you can import these, and sometimes people make them, but they're not actually readily available here in Australia. So, I guess when people smoke cannabis, it takes about 2 to 5 minutes before they start to get the cannabinoids join the receptors, activate the receptors in the brain, and people will start to feel stoned or relaxed or euphoric. They'll have enhanced sensory perception, so they'll enjoy food or music or, sex more. It can promote feelings of hunger. So this is often referred to as having the munchies. For some people, they're going to have panic reactions and confusions and feelings of paranoia. I guess if this happens to you when you smoke cannabis, this is your brain telling you this is not the drug for you. So don't persist with that, because this can lead to particularly mental health problems later. People can get nauseous and headaches and reddened eyes. Reddened eyes are not necessarily something that happens to everybody. So, you know, because someone's got red eyes doesn't necessarily mean they're stoned. It increases the heart rate for up to 3 hours after smoking. And I guess people can get dizzy and impaired balance and coordination, which is why it's not a good idea to be smoking or operating machinery when you're using cannabis. When you smoke it, the effects last for 2 hours. So the peak effect of being stoned is in the first 30 minutes when it's smoked. And after about 4 to 5 hours, basically people are no longer under the effect. The problem though, and this I'll talk about with roadside drug testing, is that it actually stays in your system for quite a significant amount of time. So on the roadside drug tests, if people have had a smoke and they're just, it can take up to 12 hours before they no longer get so they can still get a positive saliva test up to 12 hours. So it's really tricky. If people are long-term users, it can take up to 30 hours before the THC is processed out of their body. However, with urine and with in urine and in blood, it can hang around for up to a week in people that are just casual smokers, might have smoked once in a week. If you're a long-term smoker, it can take up to 1 to 3 months before the cannabis is cleared out of your system. So what we see with long-term heavy use of cannabis, I guess you've got a chance of developing cannabis dependence. So 1 in 10 people who try cannabis are estimated to become dependent on it. If you use at a younger age, so under the age of 16 up to 3 times a week, you've got a 1 in 5 chance of becoming dependent. Cannabis burns hotter on the throat and on the mouth, so we're seeing more upper respiratory cancers, and chronic bronchitis and permanent damage to the airways when smoked. And this is particularly so when it's mixed with tobacco. And we find about 70% of smokers cannabis smokers mix tobacco with their cannabis, and they do this because it goes further, burn better. We are also seeing cardiovascular system damage and people also experiencing mental health effects associated with cannabis use. So just to give a bit of a summary on cannabis and mental health. So mental health problems can obviously be made worse by cannabis. There's greater risk of adverse mental health problems with adolescents. So again, the earlier you use, the more chance you are of becoming dependent, and the more severe dependence, and that people will persist with their level of use. It may precipitate schizophrenia in vulnerable individuals, and obviously continued use of the drug worsens the prognosis of it. And chronic use of cannabis can lead to psychotic symptoms in vulnerable individuals, but these usually recede after they're stopped using. But again, once you've had a cannabis psychosis, again, if you use it again, it's more likely that you will also continue to experience a psychosis. So again, a really important message to get out about cannabis. Cannabis is like a beautiful key that can unlock a mental illness if you have that genetic predisposition. So as we said, like when I started working in the field about 30 years ago, we didn't get on cannabis, but certainly about 20 years ago, we started to see people turning up or wanting to get treatment for their cannabis use. So basically, if this happens more like after 5 to 10 years of people using cannabis, and particularly every day, and people will start to, when they stop using, will get anxious and nervous, decreased appetite. So these are like the opposite effects of what it's like when you're stoned. The main problem that people complain about with using cannabis is sleep difficulties, including strange dreams. And I think this is a really important thing to talk about with clients. These sleep difficulties, if they've been using for 5, 10, 20 years, can go on for a couple of months, and this can be a really kind of difficult thing for people to get around. So cannabis withdrawal will happen about 24 hours after the last smoke. So the first night's sleep may be okay, but second, third and fourth night's sleep will be particularly problematic. Some people can also experience these other symptoms. So In the literature, it talks about 1 to 7 days, but again, the longer someone smoked and the more severe their dependence is, the longer these symptoms can go on for. But certainly one of the main issues that a lot of people I've talked to that are cannabis dependent are the sleeping difficulties. And this is basically because cannabis stops you from having an REM sleep, and it also stops you from dreaming. So you can imagine after 10 years of not dreaming, then you've got a whole lot of dreams wanting to come out, and this is when that starts to happen and people process those again. Okay, we're just going to have another kind of poll on cannabis. So this is basically about the harms of smoking. So on average, how much longer do cannabis smokers hold the smoke in their lungs compared to cigarette smokers? 2 times longer, 4 times longer, 6 times longer, 8 times longer. And I'll just leave that open for another 10 seconds. Okay, I'll end the polling there. Thank you for those that have voted. Okay, share the results. Well done for those people who picked 4 times longer. You are correct. Yes, and you can see basically that the cannabis smokers hold smoke in their lungs 4 times longer, and this actually causes a lot more harm. Basically within 1 to 2 seconds of inhaling the THC, you will absorb 95% of it. And so holding it in longer, all it's going to do is maximize harm and minimize the effect. So really good harm reduction message for people that are smoking is to not hold on to it longer. This is one of the big myths about cannabis, and we particularly have a lot of bong smoking in this country. And I guess, there's a sense of the, longer you hold it in your lungs, the more stoned you're going to get. So if you can get your clients to reduce their the amount of time that they hold the cannabis in their lungs, that will be better. So we are seeing a lot of people, as I said before, mix cannabis and tobacco together. The withdrawal is pretty similar, although the sleeping problems are a lot more pronounced with cannabis smoking. Many people also become dependent on the nicotine, rather than the cannabis. And so what happens is it's like what we call the gateway effect. Is that it's like a reverse gateway, is that many people become tobacco smokers as a result of mixing the two together. This is really important information for your clients as well. And if you, so cannabis can, and particularly if you're dealing with young people who like to think that cannabis is not harmful, cannabis actually contains 3 times more and 5 times more carbon monoxide than a standard cigarette. And what that means is that it's 3 to 5 cigarettes lung damage for 1 bong or 1 joint. So if someone's smoking 20 bongs a day, they're smoking the equivalent of 60 to 100 cigarettes a day. And remember, I talked about before is that it's the tar that kills you with smoking. So again, this is a really good message to combat that information around the harms of cannabis. And there's the stat about holding cannabis in your lungs for longer. So reduction information, the best way to reduce the harms is to use a vaporizer. There is one vaporizer that has been basically sanctioned for use by the medical profession. And these are for people that are using cannabis for medical purposes. Unfortunately, it's $500. So it's not the same as a vaporizer, as a nicotine vaporizer. They are different. Try to avoid using bongs or bucket bongs. Basically, when people inhale a bong, they inhale it deep, they hold it in their lungs for longer, they expand their lungs to maximum capacity. Particularly plastic bongs are quite harmful because you're inhaling all of the CFCs that are in kind of like the plastic and the hose and the aluminium foil or whatever else they use. If you're going to smoke it, use a joint with a longer tip because, as I said before, cannabis burns longer on the throat and on the mouth. So the longer you can have between your mouth and the burning plant matter, the better. Try not to mix tobacco with it. Try to use a herbal mix. A lot of my friends, the Kiwis, don't mix tobacco at all with their cannabis. Neither do Americans. It's something that we do a lot more here. Again, don't hold it in your lungs for a long time. Please don't drive or operate machinery when stoned. And if you have a genetic predisposition or a family history of mental illness, again, you know, it's best not to use cannabis because this can exacerbate a mental illness, particularly schizophrenia, and bring it on earlier. There was some results, study that was done at University of New South Wales a number of years ago, and basically found that young people under the age of 16 who used cannabis were 2.7 times more likely to develop a mental illness than those that hadn't. I guess give yourself a break if you're becoming intolerant. So a lot of the time when someone's most likely to get stoned is the first smoke of the day. So the earlier you start smoking, basically what people are doing for the rest of the day is chasing that high. So a lot of, smokers that I've worked with over the time will say that they wake and bake. So the first thing they'll do in the morning is, have a bong, and then they'll spend the rest of the day trying to chase that high. So, even if you give yourself a day's break, people will find that they get stoned again, but they just end up spending a lot more money on smoking. So try to, if you're working with someone who's a daily smoker, try to get them to delay their first joint of the day, so get them to do something else before they do that. I guess with harm reduction and COVID around smoking, it's really traditional for people to be basically sharing their joints and etc. That's obviously not something to do. It's much more dangerous, so don't share your joints or your bong. This is some information that was developed by Newer, and it's on their website. Again, because smoking is more harmful for your lungs and stuff, maybe eating it's definitely better for you, but then be aware of the fact that it's actually certainly you'll get much more stoned for a lot longer. So people who eat cannabis can be stoned up to 5 to 12 hours after use. So take that opportunity to do that. Okay, the last poll that we'll do for the day, and the last drug that we will cover is nitrous oxide, which is again something that's quite increased in popularity amongst young people. This is a drug that we have seen increasing since the last survey. And so the question is, most deaths associated with nitrous oxide or NANGs in Australia is caused by what? So again, I'll leave this open for another 10 seconds. For those of you who haven't voted, please do. Okay, 2 more seconds. All right, I'm going to end polling and share the results. Congratulations for those of you who picked misadventure. This is what most deaths associated with the drug are associated with. So basically, people that might have used NANGs, combine it with alcohol and then fall over, or we had some deaths we had a death about 5 years ago where a young person had fallen off a balcony at school this week. So, because he was intoxicated. So deaths of this drug are quite rare, but they are more related to having misadventure. So basically nitrous was, is classified as a dissociative anaesthetic. It was discovered in the late 1970s by an English scientist. It's really kind of confusing, this drug, because actually it's not actually considered a drug as long as you're using it for culinary purposes, but it is a drug, obviously if it's being used for its psychoactive effects. So it produces feelings of disassociation from the mind and the body, and disordered perceptions, and in rare cases, visual hallucinations. Basically, the gas is inhaled by discharging the nitrous cartridges into a balloon or directly into the mouth. This is probably one of the biggest dangers with that, is because the gas in these canisters is up to minus 50 to 60 degrees. So basically people do get frostbite on their mouth and on their throat as a result of inhaling directly from the canister. So this is one of the harm reduction advice that we have, is to definitely put it into a balloon instead of inhaling it straight from the canister. It basically, the effects of it last for, like less than a minute. Now, the important distinction between the nitrous oxide that you might, so anyone who's had a baby online might have had nitrous when they were going through their contractions. Basically, if it's used, it's often used also by dentists. When you get it in a medical setting, it is mixed with oxygen. These cream bulbs here are not mixed with oxygen. So that is part of the problem with it. And one of the harm reduction things that we do with that is that we would say to people, make sure you inhale oxygen at the time when you're also inhaling these drugs. Now, this is if you're interested in what nitrous does and what it looks like, the Drugs Lab, if you put Drugs Lab into your browser, Amsterdam, Ren and Bastian are two guys in the Netherlands who basically take all these drugs and then they film themselves under the effects. I would show you this, but it's about 6 minutes. And if I show it to you through the web browser, it's all in Dutch. And if I was doing it in person, I could translate for you. But they do actually if you look at it through YouTube, have the subtitles underneath. And so the first 2 or 3 minutes of it will just show you what it's like to be under the effect of the drug, which I think is a really good thing. Maybe don't show it to young people, but and it's really good information for any other drugs if you're feeling a bit out of your depth talking about them with your clients. Have a look at Drugs Lab on in your browser and get some information about that. So again, some of the short-term effects, it gives you amazing euphoria, numbness of body. This is, again, as I said, quite popular amongst young people. So we've seen an increase since about 2009. It's basically increased 5-fold with young people. It's quite cheap, so you can buy these online. There's a few unscrupulous Uber dealers, particularly, delivering sort of, canisters to young people's houses. They cost about $1 each per canister, cheaper if you buy them in bulk. And again, young people often use them at the end of the night when the other drugs might have run out. So you can see here, and when I was in the Netherlands a couple of years ago, we would see a lot of people in nightclubs sitting and inhaling these balloons on the dance floor. If we look at the sort of long-term effects, so vitamin B depletion can happen as a result and this causes brain and nerve damage, and the risks are higher for women and vegetarians because they have less B12. There can be some ringing or buzzing in the ears, incontinence, numbness in the hand and feet, limb spasm, potential birth defects if you use them during pregnancy, weakened immune system, depression, psychological dependence, and psychosis. I guess an overdose, and this is quite rare, so asphyxia can happen, and this is because when the body's deprived of oxygen. So one of the harm reduction things, as I said before, is when you're inhaling in the balloon, is make sure you inhale oxygen at the same time. People can get headaches and dizziness and confusion, and this is, I guess, when the misadventure happens and people can, get, fall over or get burnt or whatever. Irregular heartbeat and seizures can happen, but deaths are pretty rare with it. So again, if you have too much, you can get a loss of blood pressure, fainting and heart attack. It can be fatal if you don't get enough oxygen. And as I said, mixing a nitrous with alcohol, which often is confusion, feelings of heavy or sluggishness, reduced concentration or body control. So some harm reduction information if you're working with clients that are using this drug. Really important stuff is to use the balloon to minimise the effects of frostbite to the nose and lips and throat and the vocal cords. So again, it's between minus 50 to 60 degrees Celsius, which basically is really problematic. I don't know why we need to advise people not to put a plastic bag over their heads, but they do because they think they'll get more intoxicated this way. Again, because of the disassociation that can happen, you could basically kill yourself doing that. Try not to use alone or in dangerous or isolated places, spraying near flamed substances or cigarettes, etc. So again, this is where some of this misadventure happens. if they're drinking with alcohol or mixing other drugs. So a lot of the times people will, and you'd certainly see this a lot in nightclubs where they're selling nitrous balloons over in Europe for about €5 for a pop. And they often recommend it. Well, it wasn't recommended, but people would find that they would be able to bring their ecstasy back on. So that's why people would use them then. So, standing or dancing while inhaling can be dangerous. And I think really important information is make sure they don't use more than 5 nitrous balloons per session and leave several minutes between taking another hit to minimise harm. Okay, as I said, mobile drug testing is a thing. You guys, it's been around for about 10, 15 years in New South Wales. And this is just some information again about how long these drugs can be detected in saliva tests. So for up to 12 hours for THC if it's just used frequently. If their long-term use is up to 30 hours. So methamphetamine or MDMA or cocaine. So in New South Wales, we test for cocaine as well. It's around 2 days for these drugs. So again, really important information for people who are using is, if they've been using clubbing drugs, is not to drive for a couple of days because again, you could get a drug driving charge, and which means losing your license and heavy fines as well. So any questions or comments on that before I just take you through just some information about where you can get further information around drugs?
We do have a few questions in the Q&A box. Everyone that's attending, you're still welcome to submit more. So we had one that says, does a person's BMI make a difference with the level of alcohol one can consume?
Yeah, no. Well, it's interesting, that one. So no, technically speaking, because we saw this with tolerance of alcohol. Well, sorry, yes. So slimmer people, and that's why women are more affected by by alcohol. So a small build woman will basically get more intoxicated than someone who is of a bigger build. So people with less weight will basically feel the effects more than someone who's got more weight.
Someone also asked, when would a doctor prescribe e-cigarettes just as a harm reduction, even though they aren't really?
Yeah, so I guess if you would have a conversation with your doctor and you wanted to reduce smoking and you had tried other ways of quitting before and they'd been unsuccessful, certainly many GPs will not all GPs will be able to prescribe them. I know, I heard something the other day on the radio that says that, but I would, certainly my GP does, but she was the one who was interviewed on the radio about it. So that's a good question. I might have to take that on notice, but I would say if you had a conversation with your doctor and said that you tried other ways of quitting and you hadn't been able to do that, you could definitely talk to them about prescribing, nicotine for e-cigarettes for you. They have definitely found that and I think this is the confusion about it, is that, they have been effective in helping people quit because they do deliver nicotine, and particularly the dual ones, at the same level of that a cigarette does. So, they can be an effective quitting aid. It's just that we just don't want to encourage people who have not been smoking to take it up and then become dependent on the nicotine that they use and then switch to smoking. And a lot of people also do both. Part of the conundrum about e-cigarettes and vaping is that they've been, I guess a lot of young people think they're really cool and they can do lots of tricks with it and stuff like that. So, and they've been marketed as kind of safe, and that's why people think, and I think a really good thing you can have a discussion with a young person about if they're smoking is, pulling apart safe and safer as a discussion point. And safer doesn't mean safe or no harm, actually.
The next question was, which receptors does CBD chemical target related to COVID?
So it's the AC2 receptors that are in our lungs. And so these are the receptors that basically, so smokers have more of these receptors, which means they're more likely to suffer the harms associated with smoking, with COVID when they have it.
So it says, can you explain why someone who is a long-term daily cannabis user would pass a roadside drug test?
Look, the saliva tests are not always accurate for cannabis. You know, so they have found in experiments where, you know, people have just smoked a bong or a joint and had the saliva test and basically have been able to pass it. So they're a bit inconsistent with THC, you know, so you can get false positives and false negatives with them. And that's because THC is quite sticky, so it doesn't actually stick to the scraper that they use as effective as the other drugs. So it's not as effective at picking up kind of like, and part of the problem with the roadside drug tests is they're not actually testing for impairment, they're testing for prior use, which is the problem I personally have with them. Whereas a roadside test for alcohol basically accurately measures whether or not you're intoxicated. So when you do a roadside drug test for alcohol use, and that's done with counting often and measuring alcohol in the breath, if you get over 0.05, then they will actually take you to the van and you will or to the police station, and you'll be measured on a calibrated machine that will give you a more accurate result for that. With the roadside drug test, if you get a positive, they'll test you again. If you get a second positive, then you will go and get either a proper saliva test in the police station or the roadside drug testing van. But it's a bit inconsistent saliva with THC.
Someone also asked, what are some of the questions to ask a cannabis user to assess the impact of their use and frequency of their use?
There's some really, the use, when the National Cannabis Prevention Information Centre was available, there was some really good information online to have discussions with young people around cannabis. I think probably some of the harm reduction information that I presented earlier is a really good information and way to have a discussion with someone. I think, a lot of young people still believe that cannabis is something that God gave us and it's harmless and all of that type of thing. So I think discussing information around that it contains more tar is really important. I think maybe having what we would talk about, a motivational, conversation around the pros, why do you like smoking cannabis? What do you get out of it? And then maybe having a discussion around what are some of the negative things about it. Maybe also looking, cannabis is quite expensive these days. So if someone is smoking, and most people who are dependent on a drug, use about 1 gram of that substance a day. So cannabis is, ranges depending on how big amount you buy it in, but around $20 for 1 gram. So if they're smoking, 6 to 7 grams a week, that's about $120, $140. That's about $300 a month times 12 months. You can see that someone might be spending up to $2,000 to $3,000 a year on that. Maybe if they, looking at what do you want to do in life, maybe they want a new car or whatever. And then even if they cut the amount of cannabis that they're using, they might be able to reach some of their goals. So it's really around kind of like having one of those motivational conversations with them, but also providing with them with some harm reduction advice. I think also, again, that thing about wake and bake, a lot of people, when you ask them when did they get the most stoned, it'll be the first smoke of the day. And so trying to get them to do something first thing in the morning, and not having a cannabis, have a smoke as soon as they get up in the morning. And I think the hardest smoke for a lot of people to give up is the last one at night, and that's because of the sleeping problems. So maybe exploring something around, some, options around sort of, getting a better sleep and how they can deal with that sort of thing.
Slightly off that, somebody also asked, how would you engage a long-term cannabis user in discussing their use and how it impacts their parenting, as they have no plans to stop or change their patterns of use?
Yeah, look, I mean, it's again, it's one of those kind of like exploring the pros and cons of their level of use. I think, talking about the, and again, if they're an older smoker, and they're smoking a lot of cannabis and they're inhaling a lot of kind of tar in that respect, they can expect to get, some lung problems associated with it, and lung cancer associated with it, and throat cancer associated with it, because it burns a lot higher on their throat and on their lungs. I think also just, again, them wanting to be around for longer to see their kids grow up, see their grandchildren and all of that type of thing. So and maybe getting them to, not smoke in the same place as their, their young people are. Maybe if they're willing to look at, not using bongs. It's really hard to get people off bongs if they've been using them for a long time, because a lot of people find that they get a bigger hit out of them. But maybe again, trying to get them to, explore some of those harm reduction information around kind of cannabis use. But yeah, it's a difficult one for people to give up. It's the third most popular drug that people seek treatment for in Australia. But I think just exploring some of the reasons why they're using. And again, we talked a lot last week about how when, people are dependent on drugs, they've usually they've had some sort of form of trauma in their life. So maybe trying to explore some of those type of issues with the client too might be useful. And again, maybe even if getting them to try and delay, and have the smoke when their kids have gone to bed, rather than doing that in the daytime when they've got to keep their eye on the prize.
And then the last question that we'll take is there any information regarding the intersection of eating disorders and the effects of AOD use?
Don't know about that. I'm not. I don't know so much about kind of eating disorders and stuff, although I have noticed that it is certainly amongst, it's certainly increasing. I think there's possibly more links with that and social media and Instagram and that. I don't know about the links between those two, to be honest. Yeah, I can't help you with that. I can have a look in the literature for you and send that information through, but I don't know of any.
I do see that there's a few more questions, but I'm just very conscious of time, so I will pass these along to Annie and we'll get some answers for you in the next few days.
Okay, and I just want to sort of say too, just quickly, I know you guys will get a copy of this PDF, but anyway, this is just a good place to go for information. One of my favourite things is this is the Assist clinician cards. Go through about 14 different drugs here, and it's just really good information around drugs and harm reduction information and stuff like that. These are available on the Assist. So this is a screening tool that's used, and this can be a really good way. It's like a good way to assess people's alcohol and other drug use. It screens for 10 different drugs at the same time. So for those people who might have been aware of the audit, which is the alcohol use disorders test, it was developed by the World Health Organization. But these are some great clinician cards that are available on the website, and I find them really useful. And it's got everything you need to know about drugs, how much they cost, what they look like, what it feels like, and some harm reduction advice on them. And also, if you're working with clients that are using Harm Reduction Victoria, also has some great resources, so avail yourself of that. So thank you for that. I'll see you the same time, same place next week. Next week we'll be looking at the psychostimulants. So we'll be looking at MDMA, methamphetamine, and ketamine, which isn't a psychostimulant, and one other one. I can't remember, my brain's dead, but I look forward to seeing you then. I hope that's been useful, and have a good week, everyone, and stay safe for those who are in Sydney. I'm thinking of you.